I spent the last few months teaching myself everything and anything there is in terms of various models in order to set up my own home lab. And as I'm sure you already know, there are at this moment two fundamental different worlds when it comes to LLM models. One of them being closed weight models, but also on the other hand, you have the open weight models. And if you saw Jensen's from NVIDIA's letter to the government, he was very emphasizing on the difference between the two and the fact that we need to give the open weight models also a chance. And in this video, I want to talk a little bit about why I chose to go to the open weight route when it comes to setting up my own lab at home, and maybe some of the differences that I've noticed when I started teaching myself about closed weight versus open weight, and what ultimately made me make that decision to go open weight instead. So in the industry right now, there are two fundamentally different worlds when it comes to different LLM models. One of them being closed weight cloud APIs, whereas the open weight downloadable models. When it comes to closed weight systems, you can think about OpenAI or Google Gemini or Anthropic. All of these are managed in a black boxes, so to speak, where the neural network ways, for example, stay on their corporate servers. And as you interact with them exclusively through, for example, either a web interface or API endpoint, you actually don't own that data yourself. What makes these closed models very attractive is their multi-billion-dollar refinement, because they undergo very aggressive reinforcement learning specifically designed to make them feel extremely intuitive or very polished out of the box. You're able to interact with them and they feel very comfortable for you to actually have an intentful and effortless interaction, so to speak. But that polish comes actually with a serious strings attached, and that is that you don't have any data privacy with them. There are definitely token rates, and so after a while, if you end up either subscribing to them or pay for specific tokens, they end up costing you a lot. And also, they have very strict guardrails. And so sometimes maybe you're having a conversation that might be interpreted differently, and they might be a very strict guardrails. And essentially, you are very, very much dependent on these companies to be able to interact with these closed weight LLM models. On the other hand, if you work with open weight models, for example, Llama, Qwen, DeepSeek, the equation is totally changed in that you absolutely own the data. Everything that you basically work with these open weight models, because you have to download them and you have to keep them locally on your machine, you have a much more control, if you will, over these parameters, over, for example, these LLMs that you work with. And at the same time, you really don't have to ask for permission, because there are also no specific guardrails that are input there, and you'll be able to essentially work with them as freely as you want them to, and the IP is yours. But it does come with a price, because they are not as intuitive, if you will, and out of the box usage, if you will, in comparison to closed weight models, because they are extremely rigid in that it is as if you're talking to a person or a model that is very, very literal in terms of what you tell it. So it is, unlike the closed weight models, it is not as intuitive and sort of reading between the lines. You can't really expect it to understand you if you say something and you're not very articulate. They can't really read between the lines. So they literally read everything that you write or you say. And so that is the price that you have, one of the prices that you have to pay when you work with open weight models, let's say DeepSeek or Llama. Now, for my own independent postdoc work in terms of symbiotic intelligence, I chose to go the open weight model route for several reasons. One of them is the IP, obviously, because I really wanted to be able to sort of not only store the data but also have those research work and collaboration and the type of work that I do for it to be totally local and private and not be out in the cloud. And all the technical aspects, for example, that I upload, or all the postdoc work that I have, potential patent ideas or raw research transcripts, was very important for me for them to live in a sort of a private setting. So in the beginning, I made a mistake to work with the closed weight models. But then after a while, I realized that there are a lot of things that I want to have discussions around that I didn't really feel comfortable with. And so when I learned more and more about these open weight models, such as, let's say, Llama or DeepSeek, I realized that I would be able to really discuss and work on these research specs and technical specs much more freely. And so as a result, I set up that AI lab in my own home, and I ended up buying the NVIDIA DGX workstation, as well as running the OpenWeb UI for the interface. And as a result, now I can, for example, pile in the Llama open weight LLM model as well as DeepSeek. And those are both open weight. Another reason I chose it was because none of these open weight models are token dependent. And so, for example, if you know that you're going to be doing a lot of research work, you don't want to put yourself in a situation that you continuously have to buy tokens, because after a while it really adds up. And so obviously the NVIDIA DGX box, there is an upfront cost with it, which is almost $5,000 at this point. But the beauty of it is that you do pay the upfront for the workstation, and you have a long-term vision. In that sense, it's actually much better because you will end up saving a lot of money, or at least not spending a lot of money, because these tokens can eventually cost a lot. So not only don't you own your data, but also you end up paying a lot. Now, I understand that these tokens cost a lot because they are doing a lot of compute for the closed weight model. So I totally get it. There's a whole business, billion-dollar business around it. But for people like me who genuinely want to utilize LLM models in order to work on specific research topics, but don't necessarily have the bandwidth and the money to keep paying for all these very expensive tokens in the long run, this was not a good idea. So I decided to pay up the upfront cost in terms of having my own workstation, but now I can freely work with these open weight models, and don't have to really be always in the lookout as to how much it's going to cost me, because at this point the only thing that is going to cost me is the electricity cost, and that's not a whole lot if you compare that with the tokens that you might end up paying a lot to these open closed weight models such as Anthropic, OpenAI, and so forth. Another huge differentiator between these models, open weight versus closed weight, is that when you work with closed weight models such as, let's say, Claude, they are spending billions and billions of dollars to have these reinforcement trainings on them. And so as a result, when you work with them, they are much more quote unquote intuitive. But when you work with an open weight model, let's say in my case, Llama and DeepSeek, you really have to train them. And even if you train them, they are not they don't feel as intelligent, if you will, in comparison, let's say, to Claude. And that is because they are very literal in terms of the way in which you interact with them. Also, they don't necessarily remember all the context that you upload. Let's say that in my case, I had a transcript that I uploaded with all my text specs and literature review, let's say for the project that I'm working on, the symbiotic intelligence. And I have to keep tagging that specific knowledge base that I've uploaded when I'm interacting with it. And so let's say I'm doing a research on a particular parts of my work, and when I'm asking a question or when I'm suggesting something or when I wanted to do something for me, I need to tag and say, okay, this is the literature review that I added. This is a tag for it. I want you to look at this part of the document, and this is my question, and this is what I want you to do. So you really need to be dealing with it like, let's say if you have a junior research assistant or an intern, it's not like you're going to have an advanced research assistant, let's say, that you can rely on having a lot of advanced knowledge already. So that's a bit of a, I guess, con in working with those, if you think about pros and cons. But again, for my case, it makes sense because I am not looking so much for the convenience as to I am looking for something that doesn't end up costing me a lot, and also something that I could keep it private and local. And so for me, that trade-off makes sense. But for you, maybe it doesn't make sense. Or caring about your IP, then of course that makes much more sense. Or maybe you don't want to pay $5,000 or so for upfront costs for the workstation. Another thing I also want to mention, that once you get the workstation, in my case the GX box from NVIDIA, the initial setup is very hard. So you have to go and either read all the forums and make sure that you set up and do it very, very right from the get-go, from the beginning, because these workstations are not as convenient as let's say a MacBook laptop setup, because they are very, very sensitive workstations. So you have to treat it like you have a data center, a small data center in your home. So anything that you set up in there, you have to be very careful. And it's not as easy as, oh, I messed up, let's turn it off and on. You can't do that. Lesson learned, because even an NVIDIA DGX box, if you want to turn it off and on, it really treats it as a security issue. So you might not be able to even turn it on like in full 24 hours, because it says, oh my God, there's a security issue and I have to shut down. So you won't be able to like turn it back on. That actually happened to me in the beginning. So the upfront, not only the financial cost, but also the working and your brain power cost is a lot, because there are many things that could potentially go wrong once you start actually even configuring the workstation. But once you go through that hurdle, once you set it up, it's very smooth. It works perfectly. The GX box has its own web UI interface, pretty easy. You also get access to Jupyter Lab UI that you could easily, for example, write your Python codes in it. It also has a Python notebook in it, so you can use that notebook as well. And all of that, by the way, is local in your workstation. And because it's a beast in terms of the RAM, 128 gig RAM, and the storage that it has, you really don't need to ever think about running out of space or RAM, because that is how NVIDIA box is made. If you decide to go that route, I think Mac also has. Those are the good things that basically works really well once you set everything up. And even though, by the way, when you use the Jupyter Lab and or the notebook that is all local, let's say in this case with the GX box, obviously if you write a code that it doesn't understand the syntax, it's going to tell you. So obviously, like any Python that you write, it's going to tell you that, hey, I don't recognize this. But any library that you want to download and upload and whatnot, it's pretty straightforward. So you can definitely work very seamlessly with it once it's set up. But again, the upfront cost in terms of the workload as to how to set it up, as well as paying out of pocket, it's a lot. But once you have it, you really have your own home lab that you can trust, and so forth. And then one last thing I want to mention also regarding the open weight LLM models, let's say DeepSeek or Llama. There are tools that you can use in order to, for example, have a lightweight LoRa adapters to make it so that using, for example, Unsloth tool to install it and use it so that you can have these fine tuning that the closed weight models use a lot to fine tune their models out of the box. So you can definitely do those things as well, but you don't really need to do it in the beginning. You only need to do it after, when you maybe come to a point where you're like, okay, now I really need to fine tune this model. So there's a little bit of a work here and there, but in my case, for example, it was worth the money and the time because the long time horizon sort of makes it worthwhile. And most specifically, I think, when it comes to the privacy. And one last thing also I want to mention, if you saw Jensen's tweet, the letter that he wrote and he posted on X, in that he is really advocating for the open weight because there is not a whole many people who are very influential like him who are defending open weight from the closed weight model space, such as Anthropic, OpenAI, etc. And so it's very healthy for us to have a person who's that influential like Jensen from NVIDIA to also talk about these things, because last thing we would want is for the closed weight models to be the only thing that the government will subsidize and support, because then people like us who really want data sovereignty won't be able to access these open weight models, and all of our data will then have to live in the server of these huge, humongous closed weight model systems, such as the companies like Anthropic and OpenAI. And in that case, none of us will actually own our own data. And for those of us who are conducting research and want to have full access to our own data, this would be a really bad future. And so I think that it's really good for us to support these both fundamentals, obviously, but for us to also really be aware of the difference. Now, I personally have no idea, obviously, where everything is going. I'm just sharing with you my own experience and why I chose this model instead of the other for my own lab. and just thought maybe a few of you out there would be interested. So that's all I had for you. That's all I had to share with you today. I hope you found it useful, and I'll share with you in the future also some of the I guess improvements that I've done recently with sympathetic intelligence, but I haven't posted a lot of videos because I've been really heads down working on this, but I'll do more videos in the future to share with you some more details about this work. Okay, take care. Bye.